All right, I am starting a discussion of the analytic of the sublime, which is the other part of aesthetics. Incidentally, both the sublime and the beautiful are part of aesthetics. So a general aesthetic theory subsumes both these concepts. To that extent, it's quite unlike very modern way of understanding the aesthetic, which relates only to the beautiful, not so much to the sublime. All right, that's just a clarification. And before I proceed on this topic today, I would like to say something by recalling the last discussion. And I would like to be forgiven for having missed the nature of a question that one of the participants had asked me about whether allegorical art can be explained or can be addressed given the Kantian theory of the aesthetics of the beautiful. And I recall saying rather uncritically that for any work of art, this theory is equally applicable as far as Kant thinks it to be, because it's, after all, a general theory, aesthetic theory. Soon after that conversation, I realized that was a very bad reply on my part, because it's absolutely true that allegorical art cannot be really accounted for by a formalist Kantian aesthetic theory, not just Kantian aesthetic theory, but any formalist theory. And the famous modern formalist is Clive Bell in aesthetic theory. The reason why that's the case is that allegorical art is inherently, it inherently involves content and meaning. And therefore it goes beyond pure form, including symbolic representation and moral and political interpretations. Allegorical art is no art if content is suspended or bracketed out as irrelevant from the aesthetic point of view. And Kant's theory largely de-emphasizes the role of the work's content or meaning, because he views such aspects of content and meaning as potentially distracting from the formal experience of beauty. For him, the experience of beauty is the experience generated by its form, pattern, etc., not the content. And so not just Kantian formalist aesthetics, but any formalist aesthetics prioritizes the formal experience of beauty, whereas allegory or allegorical art prioritizes the content and meaning embedded in the works. And therefore, I wonder if the questioner had this in mind, and I had given a really bad answer by not thinking about it somewhat deeply. So this is just a sort of rectification. Just imagine taking a Kantian approach to analyze an allegorical painting by solely basing the analysis on its composition, on the brush strokes, on color palette, ignoring the symbolic figures and their narrative context. It would just not be an appreciation of allegorical painting at all. Okay? So thank you for raising that very good question. And again, I'm sorry I did not do justice to it. I hope today I'm doing justice, a belated justice to it. All right, now let's get down to the analytic of the sublime. Okay, I start this first point by drawing a contrast between the analytic of the beautiful and the analytic of the sublime. And this is a quotation from Kant. The first quote is missing. That's an omission from my part. The beautiful in nature is a question of the form of the object. And this consists in limitation. Whereas the sublime is to be found in an object, even devoid of form, so far as it immediately involves, or else by its presence provokes, a representation of limitlessness, yet with a superadded thought of its totality. Now, of course, we are going to unpack this quotation, but very quickly to say something about what it means. The contrast is clear. The beautiful is a matter of form, something which has form, and within a limited space. Okay, it's kind of bounded entity that you are appreciating, whose form you are appreciating, whereas the sublime is devoid of form. It is formless, and it is also a representation of limitlessness or unboundedness. And this phrase, a superadded thought of its totality, that of course we will have to analyze a little later. What it really means is if you are confronting something which is limitless, like the starry night sky, yeah? The sky has no limits. And but when you are appreciating its sublimity, then you appreciate it by conceiving of it in a kind of totality as against its unboundedness or limitlessness. Okay, so move to the next. And here Kant begins by contrasting the sublime with the beautiful. That's the beginning. While beauty involves harmony and form, more contrasts now, pleasing the imagination in a restful way. The sublime is associated with formlessness, boundlessness, and a sense of mental agitation. Look at the response part. The sublime generates mental agitation, whereas the beautiful generates a restful, harmonious pleasure. That's an interesting contrast. Then the sublime stirs a complex emotional response, combining displeasure at the mind's inadequacy with pleasure in reason's triumph. Now we are addressing a more complicated analysis of the notion of the sublime in contrast to the notion of the experience of the beautiful. Because here, it's a complex emotional response, unlike the emotional response to the beautiful, which is not really complex. And what is the complexity of our emotional response to the sublime? One is that the sublime, as we will see very soon, the sublime is always about something vast, infinite, and therefore the mind is inadequate to fully grasp it, especially the imagination is inadequate to fully represent something which is so limitless. But then, so that creates a kind of displeasure that the mind is inadequate to representing the sublime. So, but on the other hand, there is pleasure in reason's triumph. And this is one of the most interesting notions in Kant. It's like imagination's failure and reason's triumph. They are together. Imagination fails to represent the boundless sublime, but reason succeeds, becomes triumphant in the sense that reason is able to grasp it, rationally grasp even infinity. Okay, so let's move on to get more ideas about it. The next bullet. It reveals the mind's rational superiority over nature's vastness or power, distinguishing between the mathematically sublime, which is of boundless magnitude, like, let's say, the limitless sky, or infinite numbers, and dynamically sublime. Dynamically sublime refers to nature, the overwhelming power or might that nature has, say, a volcano, an earthquake, or some, disturbance in the ocean, which is overwhelming power. So that's why it's called dynamically sublime. And whatever is vast and overwhelming in that large magnitude is the object of sublime experience. So rational superiority over nature's vastness or power means just what I said a little while ago, that the rational mind is able to grasp the vastness, the infinity, despite imagination's inadequacy to represent it. So it is as if reason asserts its superiority over nature's vastness. Okay. And by the way, Immanuel Kant is probably the foremost rationalist who talks so particularly about the power of reason in different aspects of human existence. Okay, now we shall analyze these two kinds of sublime, mathematically sublime and dynamically sublime. Let's start with mathematically sublime. It refers to magnitude and our imagination's limits in the sense of being able to, or being unable to, represent that magnitude. The mathematical sublime occurs when we encounter something vast, like an ocean or starry sky, that defies comprehension in its vast magnitude. The imagination fails or feels inadequate to grasp infinity, but reason asserts its supremacy over the imagination's inadequacy by its ability to conceive infinity, elevating the mind above sensory limits. Now, this power of reason to, the ability of reason to conceive infinity is not just the human mathematical ability of reason to conceive of infinity in literally mathematical terms, but also infinity in terms of spatial infinity, like the limitless sky, or maybe even the infinite universe, because reason is able to conceive of it in some kind of conceptual totality. That's what elevates the mind over sensory limits. That means our sensory system has limits, like imagination's limitation in representing something. But in contrast to limits of the sensory, the power of reason is overwhelmingly large, and that's what elevates the mind. The mind is elevated once the mind realizes the power of reason to be able to conceive even of infinity. Now we come to dynamically sublime. That's another kind of sublime. Kant talks about two kinds of sublime. The first we have already explained. And this refers to nature's might and moral freedom. Now, that connection between nature's might and moral freedom will become clear from this discussion. The dynamically sublime, the word dynamic itself refers to nature in terms of its power. It arises from encounters with nature's overwhelming power, such as storms or volcanoes, which evoke fearfulness. And this is a familiar experience. Well, familiar for those who have witnessed or experienced storms, and God forbid, not the experience of volcanoes, but we can imagine. Whilst this power of nature threatens our physical existence, the mind realizes its moral independence, rooted in reason, which is not vulnerable to any natural force. Now, this bullet is very significant because it is here the point about the connection between reason's power and moral freedom is established. Okay, so when, for instance, we are witnessing a storm, a tremendously huge storm, even something like tsunami, okay, somehow the resilience of human mind or human reason is to even have some kind of controlling thought about it, not just physically controlling the situation through disaster management, but a kind of ability of reason to overcome a crisis like that. So, and this ability of reason is a kind of testimony to the mind's not being vulnerable to any natural force. Okay? So natural force is, of course, overwhelming, but probably the ability of reason is even stronger. And this contrast, asserting reason's ability even to overcome natural forces, is considered to be a kind of indication of moral independence. That means this rational autonomy becomes the basis of human morality, moral independence, moral autonomy. So that's the connection he is making between the dynamically sublime, that nature's power, and moral freedom. Thus, the sublime connects to our moral vocation. It testifies to the invincibility of rational autonomy, even against calamitous natural power. So what we see here is how the aesthetic of the sublime is connecting to morality. Now, we should also recall that the aesthetic of the beautiful also connects with morality. And if I ask you in what way the beautiful connects with morality, and in what other way the sublime connects with morality, now the answer to the second question is already given. That is the way in which the sublime connects with morality. But we have to recall in what other way the beautiful connects with morality. And I think you will easily recall there was this disinterested experience of beauty. And that disinterestedness is a moral property. I mean, it could also be a moral property. That's how the beautiful connects with morality. But this one is a stronger connection with morality, the sublime's connection with morality. Okay, now, this is another comparison, the subjective nature of the sublime. You recall, we also discussed the subjective nature of the beautiful. I'm sure you would recall my saying this idiom that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, so which talks about beauty being a subjective property, or a property of subjective experiential response to the object. It's not a property of the object itself. Now, for Kant, a similar argument is given about the sublime. For instance, if the starry sky, the mathematically sublime, is producing a certain kind of experience in you, the experience of the sublime, then it doesn't mean that this sublime is a property of the object, the starry sky, but it is more a property of the mind, which is responding in this way. Okay, so this is a quotation. The sublime is not to be looked for in the things of nature, but only in our own ideas. Hence, it is the disposition of the soul evoked by a particular representation, engaging the attention of the reflective judgment, and not the object that is to be called sublime. So this is the subjectivity argument of the sublime. Sublimity is not an objective property of external objects, but is a subjective judgment. Objects merely occasion the feeling, and the sublime lies in the mind's reflective process. This subjectivity has universal validity or communicability. Now, we should be able to recall our last discussion where the subjectivity of aesthetic experience of the beautiful was also claimed to have universal validity and communicability. The same argument is here with regard to this sublime. The reason is it stems from faculties of imagination and reason, which are common to all human beings, though only a cultured mind can fully appreciate the sublime. So the commonality of rational faculties explains the universal validity or communicability of this subjective experience of the sublime, exactly like the subjective experience of the beautiful. All right, now another complex point, pleasure through pain, the negative pleasure of the sublime. The feeling of the sublime, this is a quotation from Kant. The feeling of the sublime is therefore at once a feeling of displeasure arising from the inadequacy of imagination in the aesthetic estimation of magnitude to attain to its estimation by reason. Let's analyze the first part. Stop here at this comma. The feeling of the sublime is paradoxical because it is both pleasure and pain. That's why it's called negative pleasure. What is negative about it? That is, it is a feeling of displeasure initially because the imagination is unable fully to represent the magnitude of what gives us this sublime experience, let's say the starry sky. Uh, so the imaginative aesthetic estimation of the magnitude is not adequate. But then reason takes over where imagination fails. And reason is able to estimate the magnitude conceptually or rationally. It's the same point that I made a little while ago. And the second part is, and a simultaneously awakened pleasure. So there is an initial feeling of displeasure, but then at the same time there is the awakening of a pleasure as well, which arises from this very judgment of the inadequacy of the sensible faculty. That means the sensible faculty is unable to fully grasp the vast magnitude of the sublime. Imagination also fails, but it's like the human mind says to itself, if a sensory faculty and the imagination fail, doesn't matter, because reason doesn't fail. Reason is still able to grasp it. So that's the kind of sense of rational victory over an initial impression of sensory or imaginative failure to grasp the sublime. That's what explains why it is a mixture of feeling of displeasure and awakening of pleasure all at once. So the above remark captures the paradox. Whilst the sublime produces a negative pleasure distinct from beauty's positive delight, or by the way, only the sublime produces negative pleasure. The beautiful doesn't. The beautiful always produces a positive delight. There is nothing mixed about it. It's unmixed delight. Whilst displeasure occurs from the imagination's failure to represent infinite magnitude, the sublime's pleasure emerges from reason's ability to overcome the mind's initial struggle, marking it as a reflectively triumphant experience. Now, this is psychologically also very interesting. I mean, initially, when let's say we are looking at something vast like the starry sky, okay, and we are overwhelmed by its vastness, but then there is a natural tendency of our imagination to represent how vast it is. And of course, imagination fails. It's too vast for imagination to be able to represent it. So that's the kind of initial displeasure of a sense of failure, or at least a sense of inadequacy. But then reason has an ability which imagination lacks, and therefore it not only makes up for that inadequacy, it in fact has a sense of triumphant victory, triumphant experience, which is acquired reflectively. That means by the use of reason. Thus, by grounding the sublime in rational faculties. Now, this is very interesting, because the sublime is ultimately grounded in rational faculties, even though the experience of the sublime is, of course, subjective, and therefore not a matter of reason, but a matter of sensation. Okay? The actual grounding is in reason, not in sensation. Now, incidentally, this is where Kant's notion of the sublime differs crucially from Edmund Burke's notion of the sublime. Edmund Burke was previous to Kant by about 30 years or so, who had this famous book of The Origin of the Beautiful and the Sublime. an Irish philosopher, thinker, political theorist as well. So Edmund Burke had a theory of the sublime, which was not grounded in rational faculties like Kant's. Burke's sublime was grounded in pure sensation, sense, and the brain, okay, not reason. Now, Kant elevates it beyond mere sensation by tying it to human dignity and moral consciousness. So now I summarize Kant's argument. The sublime is a subjective aesthetic judgment triggered by formless, boundless, or powerful phenomena. That's one salient point. The sublime differs from the beautiful in its formlessness and emotional complexity, involving a negative pleasure from the interplay of imagination's failure and reason's triumph. Next, the mathematically sublime reveals reason's ability to conceive infinity, transcending sensory limits. That means transcending the failure of the sensory system to fully grasp the mathematically sublime or the infinite. While the dynamically sublime highlights moral freedom against nature's mind. So how does it highlight moral freedom against nature's might? Well, one can discuss it much more broadly, but we don't have the time for it. Very briefly, I could add here that moral freedom for Kant, as he explains it in his second critique of practical reason, and in other works, especially groundwork, something called groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. The moral freedom is a matter of reason and not a matter of desire or emotion at all. Morality is fully a matter of reason. That means reason is able to create its own moral law, and then morality becomes a matter of self-legislation of that law. Okay, so no external force puts a moral commandment over you, according to Kant. It's very unlike the Christian notion of morality, where you are governed by the 10 commandments, and they are not part of your rationality. They are part of divinity. Okay. So Kant is a rationalist in his moral theory, and the reason why he talks about moral freedom is because the moral agent has to be free. But free from what? This freedom is not possible if you are bound by the natural laws. Okay? Because natural laws determine everything. There is no freedom in nature. Nature is bound by law. But Kant had this conception that because of the presence of reason, the human mind is able to be free from deterministic natural laws by creating its own moral law and by legislating by itself that moral law upon itself. Okay. So this ability of the rational mind to make itself free from the stronghold of the causal natural laws is what makes the human agent free. Okay? And in the case of the sublime also, when on the one hand the dynamically sublime means that nature has overwhelming power or force over us, we can't do anything about it. Okay? It's too strong against us. But then reason is able to even claim for itself a kind of unlimited power, even to challenge nature's might, or at least to say that I am not going to be subdued by nature's might. I mean, the reason is able to claim that, and that's what makes it makes the sublime very intimately connected with moral freedom. The sublime is subjective, residing in the mind's response, not in objects, making it universally communicable, but dependent on a refined sensibility. Okay, now this refined sensibility or a cultured mind, that only a cultured mind can have a grasp of the sublime. What he means is that this precisely that that reason is able to grasp even the infinite dimension, whether it is mathematically infinite or dynamically powerful. The power of reason to be able to grasp both these aspects of the sublime in their respective magnitudes. It tells us about a kind of invincible status of the free human agent, a freedom that it is endowed by the very presence and power of reason. But this, who realizes this? Only if you have refined, cultured nature or sensibility. So the grasping or the true experience of the sublime requires a very refined sensibility, a cultured mind. Okay, so now I'm coming towards the end by going to this section about a comparative assessment of the analytic of the sublime, abbreviated as AS, and the analytic of the beautiful, AB, two distinct modes of one and the same aesthetic judgment. And I was, at the very beginning, I had quickly said that both the beautiful and the sublime are equally part of aesthetic judgment, that aesthetic judgment subsumes both. That is because Kant's notion of an aesthetic judgment is contrasted with cognitive judgments on the one hand, where for judgment, the understanding applies a concept to the object and brings the object under that conceptual category. So that is cognition. I mean, normally what we do, I mean, what we call knowledge, say knowledge of facts, knowledge of the world, it's cognitive, it is conceptual thinking. Okay, concept application is necessary for the possibility of cognition or knowledge. And there is another kind of judgment which is called practical judgment, where you are judging what must be done or what has utility, what has, I mean, for example, moral judgments. So aesthetic judgments are neither cognitive factual judgments concept applying factual judgments, nor practical judgments of morality. It's a distinctive kind of judgment in which concepts are not applied. Okay, and yet you have a judgment about something being beautiful or something being sublime. And the basis of that judgment is not the object as such, but your experience of the object. So it is subjective. So aesthetic judgments are subjective experiential judgments. So both the beautiful and the sublime come under this category. All right. While the aesthetics of the beautiful explores judgment of harmony, form, and disinterested pleasure, I think we can very well recall from our last discussion, the aesthetic of the sublime tackles experiences of overwhelming magnitude or overwhelming power, the mathematically sublime and the dynamically sublime, revealing the mind's rational and moral capacities. The sublime arises from encounters with objects that lack clear form or boundaries. You can very well imagine if you're having a sublime experience of the night sky. It's not that it has a clear form, like, for example, in the case of the experience of the beautiful. If you're experiencing the beauty of a rose, it definitely has a clear form, and it also has boundaries. But in the case of the experience of the sublime, there is neither form nor boundary. It is boundless, formless, evoking a sense of limitlessness. In contrast, the beautiful depends on the form and purposive harmony of an object, producing a restful, harmonious pleasure and tied to definite boundaries. An experience of the beautiful will always produce a restful, harmonious pleasure, in contrast to the experience of the sublime, which in fact makes you restless. There's no, at least initially, there is no harmonious kind of experience. It's more of a disharmony. It's a disruptive. Okay, but Kant would say, thanks to human rationality, that where there is no form, there is no boundary, there is no harmony, even there reason is able to grasp it in terms of some kind of unity. And this victorious achievement of reason becomes the basis of a pleasure that you derive out of it. Okay? The sublime involves a reflective judgment where the mind grapples with phenomena that exceed sensory comprehension and imaginative reach. Well, this is very Kantian and very unlike Edmund Burke's conception of the sublime, because Kant is saying the sublime involves a reflective judgment. Unless you engage in a reflective judgment about the experience of the sublime object, you will not have that experience. That means reason has to play its role against sensations and imagination's failure to grasp the sublime. So reflective judgment, where the mind grapples with phenomena that exceed sensory comprehension and imaginative reach. This phrase, the mind grapples with phenomena, that means phenomena of large magnitude which produce the sublime, experience of the sublime. Mind grapples because there is disruption. It's very unlike the way the mind connects itself to the beautiful. There is disruption here. The appreciation of the beautiful in the appearance of an object that elicits harmonious pleasure requires no such intellectual struggle. That's the great difference. And the last bullet, the beautiful delights through the object's bounded form, fostering a playful unity of faculties, namely imagination and understanding. The sublime, however, disrupts this harmony as formlessness overwhelms imagination, pushing reason to the forefront. So when formlessness or boundlessness overwhelms the imagination, making a kind of frustrating experience to the imaginative approach, then reason comes, or rather the mind pushes the whole thing to reason from imagination or transition to reason, bringing reason to the forefront, and reason's reflective engagement with the vast object of vast magnitude leads to a kind of grasping of the sublime, and thereby generates a sense of pleasure. Whereas beauty is immediate and sensory, restful and harmonious, involving a recognition of the purposive nature of the object of our cognitive faculties. On the other hand, the sublime is mediated by intellectual reflection. So this is the contrast. Beauty is immediate and sensory. There is nothing mediating your experience of the beautiful object. Okay. Whereas in the case of the sublime object, there is a mediation, and that mediation is by intellectual reflection. That means, unlike in the case of the beautiful, where your sensory experience, direct, immediate sensory experience, produces the taste of the beautiful, here it is not immediate, it is mediated through intellectual reflection. As I said, that only a cultured mind would be able to appreciate the sublime, because it involves a clash between imagination and reason, thereby making it more complex and dynamic than the experience of the beautiful. Beauty is the aesthetic of harmony, form, and ease, engaging imagination and understanding in a way that feels natural and inclusive. On the other hand, the sublime is the aesthetic of conflict. See, that's the contrast again. One is the aesthetic of harmony, form, and ease. The other one is the aesthetic of conflict, formlessness, and elevation. You don't have a sense of ease like the way you have in the experience of the beautiful. Instead, you have a sense of elevation, being elevated, demanding reason's intervention and a cultured mind. So it's quite obvious that the sublime is a much more serious matter than the beautiful. The sublime is a more intellectual experience, as it reveals the mind's ability to transcend sensory constraints. Unlike beauty's focus on sensory harmony, the sublime's reliance on reason also links it to Kant's moral philosophy, while beauty remains within the aesthetic domain. Okay. Now, the Analytic of the Sublime reveals Kant's fascination with the mind's limits and its capacity to transcend them. The mathematically sublime stretches comprehension towards infinity, exposing reason's conceptual power, while the dynamically sublime confronts physical vulnerability, affirming moral freedom. Look at the way the sublime transforms you or whoever is the subject of a sublime experience. Because in this engagement with the sublime, the mind's limits and its capacity to transcend these limits, that becomes a matter of fascination for Kant. Kant is very impressed by these transcending power of the mind. And the experience of the sublime is a kind of testament to this transcending power, rationally transcending power. Now, how does this transcendence takes place? In the case of the mathematically sublime, the mind is stretched. The mind stretches itself to comprehend the infinite. So there's a kind of mind's stretching, stretching its power of comprehension to be adequate to grasp infinity. And thereby it exposes reason's conceptual power, this power of adequacy. While the dynamically sublime confronts physical vulnerability, affirming moral freedom. Now, this means that if something like a huge storm or an earthquake is creating disaster, the human mind is, through its reason, is still able to face it, not merely in terms of disaster management, that would be too literal, but the very fact that reason has this power to withstand even the most physically damaging enforcement upon the human condition. And that gives a sense of rational autonomy, which then becomes a matter of moral autonomy also, because moral autonomy requires that you are autonomous of the forces of nature. And this autonomy, moral autonomy, being autonomous of the forces of nature, causal forces of nature, is conferred upon the mind by the power of reason. So this dual structure underscores Kant's view of humans as both sensory and rational beings, caught between nature's immensity and their own dignity. Okay, so there's a beautiful duality that is underscored by Kant's analysis of the sublime, which is the duality of the sensory side of us and the rational side of us. That means we are, as it were, caught between the immensity of nature, which is, of course, very imposing, very overwhelming on us, which makes us think, at least initially, how small we are, how powerless we are. But then, when we are able to withstand it, that gives us a sense of dignity, a kind of dignity of that rational capacity. All right, now I have finished, and here I'm just mentioning these names because the theory of the sublime has a long history. In fact, one could do a wonderful PhD on the sublime by kind of historical excursus. It goes back to Longinus, the Greek theorist of the 1st century AD, who talked about the sublime in terms of an elevating state of awe through the grandeur of thought, especially in writing, grandeur of thought through strong emotions, appropriate figures of speech, noble diction, and dignified composition. So he was working out, Longinus was working out way back in time, a theory of the sublime, on the basis of writing. Okay, and he had drawn his inspiration from Homer and Plato about this conception of the sublime. Next, Edmund Burke, I already mentioned, who preceded Kant only by a few decades and had a theory, this Irish thinker had a theory which was overlapping with Kant's, but then crucially different also because, as I said, Edmund Burke's conception of the sublime was not that of rational grounding, unlike Kant's experience of the sublime or appreciation of a sublime experience, which was necessarily grounded in reason. Edmund Burke was more psychologically oriented. He was giving more of a psychological theory of how we have overwhelming awe or experience of awe, even of terror. Now, Kant, of course, we have discussed. And last, need not be the last, but just for our case, Friedrich Schiller, who also was a contemporary of Kant, and he had advanced Kant's theory, mostly agreed, but advanced it towards his claim that for education, for proper education, you need the experience of the sublime. Okay, so this advancement makes sense in contextualizing Schiller to this discussion of the sublime. Okay, I have finished it, but before I finish it, one more point that I shall talk about. Yes, notion, the technological sublime. Okay. So long we have been talking about the sublime in terms of nature. I mean, the connection of the sublime is always has been with nature. Nature is dynamically sublime, nature is mathematically sublime. But today, what has happened is a kind of disenchantment of nature in the age of secularization, especially inviting technical action and control. Once you are secularized, you are managing your life and existence and the world through technical action and technical control. So earlier it was the power of divine nature, but now that power, divine power, has been transferred to the power of technology. That's what we are in this age, at this age. That's why I'm addressing this. In fact, someone called David Nye wrote a book called American Technological Sublime. The book was published in 1994 by MIT Press. And of course, the word American occurs because where else has technology been at its most than in America? And so the sublime now returns to what was at the time of Longinus a work of human techne. Longinus was also talking about human techne, but not in the sense of he was talking about human techne, but more about the ability to compose literature, that craft. David Nye is talking about how Americans embrace the technological sublime uh, as they once embraced the natural sublime. So now you have a kind of a counterpart to the natural sublime, which is the technological sublime. And of course, we have, in a way, a sense of the technological sublime was already had, maybe in some milder form, with the inception of the Industrial Revolution, when massive, large factories and other technological activities had completely changed the human world, and humans were overwhelmed by that industrial revolutionary outcome. But now, of course, you have all kinds of technology. Uh, One of the greatest change in technology is what is known as converging technologies, which is the convergence of frontline technologies such as uh, nanotechnology, biotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science. So these four are abbreviated into NBIC. And together, what they can do through this technological synergy is tremendously surprising, astonishing, and it creates a sense of the sublime because it is so very overwhelming. And computer age information technology discloses a whole new range of sublime experiences. Interestingly, almost everything, starting from genes, books, large organizations, they all become a relational database. You can convert them into database, and people are talking about big data in different ways. So now database in this computer age is becoming a kind of what some people call the ontological machine. Onto is about being, logical, of course. Computer is a logical machine that transforms everything into a collection of recombinatory elements. That's what computation does. Recombinatory elements. So database also transforms our experience of this sublime, technological sublime. In fact, what Kant called the mathematically sublime is interestingly, it has become literally a sublime in the age of computing, because computing manifests itself as a combinatorial explosion of database. Okay, so computer technology is a kind of probably a more literal exemplification of the mathematical sublime. And Kant, of course, would be really surprised if Kant were to come back to life and witness this mathematical sublime in the technological domain. So I thought it is good for us to bring these extra notions to bear on our discussion of Kant's theory of the sublime. So thank you very much. That is the end of today's discussion from my side. And of course, I welcome.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions, students? Any questions that you would like to put forth?
Yes, I do have one. I'm allowed. Uh,
Yes.
Please go ahead.
uh, yeah. Namaste, sir. So, my
Namaste.
question was the idea of sublime is very much connected with the act of myth creation, as I look at it. Um, First question is, how is it related to the reflective rational? this rational grasping it, if it gives rise to myth. So if it is really rational. Secondly, if it is a rational act, that means if myth creation is also a rational act, will the same phenomena be sublime when it is rationally conceptualized as myth? So if I look at the same phenomena again after the myth is created, will it still retain its sublimity? Isn't it automatized after that? So that's my question. Thank you.
I'm rather intrigued by this question because it falls outside the ambit of maybe today's discussion, because myth creation becoming sublime is not very clear to me at this stage. I'm trying to figure out what it could mean. Let's say there are great myths, or myths that have become great. They are celebrated, and I could guess that such a mythic construction creates a kind of uncanny aura, okay, because of whatever content it has, meaning it has, symbolism it has. But the attribution of sublimity to this myth isn't very clear to me. If you could give me a little more
Okay,
description
sir.
of
So
what it could be. Yes.
maybe I was not clear. So I'm sorry. So I was. So myth creation is the subsequent act. First, there is this concept of sublimity, or the act of sublime experience, and that then based on that act there is myth creation.
Okay.
The
Okay.
subsequent act is creation of myth.
Okay. Okay. All right. That means there must have been an initial experience of the sublime in whatever form,
Yes. Yes, sir.
and the the impact of that experience in society or in humanity becomes such that, let's say, writers or composers create a certain kind of myth.
Yes, sir.
Maybe, yeah, it need not be composed linguistically. Probably one could compose a music which would embody this mythology. Yeah, and then probably what you're saying is that it attains a sublime character because of the way the composition has been done. Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, which myths would you cite as having this property? Sublime mythological constructions. Any example?
Example would be, sir, let's say, um, how to say, the let's say the Kailash Mansarovar. Now, I mean, I will not be,
Mhm.
how to say, the myth then again is problematic. But if even if we understand it as a myth, now this experience of this mountain in nowhere, and in some otherworldly, so we have this otherworldly experience, and throughout the lore of yogic lore, let's say, the myth has been created. But
Yeah.
what my question is, isn't it so wouldn't it become automatized after a certain point of time? Because now when we interact with it, the myth has been conceptualized, and then my mind will be able to um, give or impose a form on it, so it will become beautiful rather than sublime.
Oh, that's a wonderful analysis. Thank you. I'm glad you said that. Yes. So that when you have, let's say, Manas Sarovar, what is that? Manas Sarovar.
Kailash
Okay.
Mansarovar, yes.
Yeah. Initially, there's a kind of pristine, sublime experience of it. Okay. And somehow this pristine, sublime experience is transmitted, and there is a kind of folklore about it. And then somebody comes and constructs or composes a myth about it, not just um, verbal folklore, but let's say composition. Okay. Once it is composed, your question is whether the composed representation of the sublime retains that sublimity, or because of this rational act of composition, for representing that or capturing that sublime experience, it loses that pristine, sublime aura or whatever. Am I right? Is that the way?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Exactly.
Oh, okay. My answer would be it depends upon the nature of composition. Okay. Let's take the example of epics. They are not, they also have mythical elements. Let's say Ramayana or Mahabharata or Homer's epics. Okay. They resort to the mythical. And the composition is wonderful. Now, after this composition, has that original mythical content lost its influence, or that sublime element is now shared by readers or by whoever is a spectator or audience in different ways? Maybe that sublimity persists in different forms. Okay, it percolates into the human psyche. But you may be right, when we conceptualize it too much, okay, let's say there is a lot of, let's say there are 500 doctoral work on it, on this particular composition. After a while, it becomes saturated. Okay? Then probably the magic of that sublime experience loses its original intensity. Yeah, maybe, yes.
Thank you, sir.
I think Gordana has to say something. Gordana, you have raised your hand. Is that something that you want to share?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much also for this wonderful lecture. I appreciate also that you added some post-Kantian concepts and analysis. And with regard to that, I would like to ask some questions or share some doubts. You stress that analytic of Sublime belongs to aesthetics, but with the connection with moral autonomy, in my view, also transcends the realm of aesthetics. And then the context in which moral autonomy is most relevant is actually, I would say, not in our relation to nature, but in our relation to other human beings and to society as a human creation. And then I come to technological sublime. So what I'm missing is actually what I would call social or political sublime, because I think that, of course, also thanks to technology, but not just technological, technological technology, but also, I would say, social technology or even psychological technology. We are facing, I would say, as humans living nowadays, more and more experiences of sublime, in that sense that we are overwhelmed by experiences in encounters with other human beings and political and social structures. And I am afraid that the reason is not able any longer to serve what, according to Kant, was able to do in his conception of the sublime. So somehow there are more and more experiences of being overwhelmed by structures, powerful structures. We very often even cannot locate. We just experience the consequences. But the problem is that we are less and less able to understand them, because famously Kant said nothing can be accepted which has not passed the test of the reason. So this was his famous statement. But nowadays it seems it is just the opposite. I mean, it's a kind of explosion of irrationality at different levels. And so it's just difficult to understand. And what are our remaining powers or capabilities to deal with ourselves and the world we have created? Thank you. Sorry if I was too long. Sorry.
Very well, very well. That stimulates me to think in many ways. The first point about that morality is not about our relation to nature, but to other human beings or other creatures, fellow creatures. About that, yes, you're right, except that Kant also never meant that it is in relation to nature that we get morality. All he meant was a kind of indirect relation to morality. In this direct relation to nature, the experience of the sublime, you get a kind of indirect connectedness of the sublime with moral autonomy or moral freedom, because what enables morality in his theory, it is reason's autonomy, rational autonomy, the power of reason to give the moral law and self-legislation of that moral law. And that moral autonomy, that rational autonomy finds an example in our experience of the sublime, in our rationally being able to withstand even the dynamically sublime forces that are overwhelming. At least there is this kind of resilience of reason not to become ultimately vulnerable even to the forces of nature. So that rational autonomy is a kind of mirror image of the rational autonomy which is literally there in the domain of practical reason, which is the domain of morality. So that is my first explanation of the first question. The second one is highly complex, that the technological sublime is not the only sublime in this postmodern age, because you are saying you would like to insist on there being all other kinds of sublime, so social, political, psychological, cultural, maybe, and that the dimensions in which in the postmodern times we are overwhelmed are almost limitless in almost every dimension. And that means in any direction in which you proceed, you you are only going to be overwhelmed, and your rationality is, as it were, completely at a loss what to do. It's a sort of inadequacy of rationality or reason to manage through this chaotic, unpredictable, overwhelming condition. We find that within the technological sublime very much. I mean, the psychological, the social, the cultural is, let's put them aside for the timing, because most of the psychological, the social, and the cultural are emanating from the technological sublime. All right. So biotechnology, nanotechnology, information technology, and cognitive science put together, this NBIC, can do what not today. Synthetic biology is going to intervene your organic constitution in such a way that from this human age, you might reach a transhuman age. And by the way, transhumanism has become an ideology today. It's such an overwhelming ideology. I mean, it looks as though, although it is very futuristic, in about, let's say, 1,000 years from now, will humanity be left as it is today? Because people are conceiving of a post-biological age. This kind of biotechnological intervention, or the intervention of NBIC, could practically bring a virtual end to humanity, because the human, what is biologically human, may just remain to be 20% biologically human. Maybe 80% would be all a mixture of mechanical, whatever, informational, computational, whatever. So that, you could say, cultural, psychological, and political sublime that this technological sublime is creating. It becomes a kind of offshoot. And now, Kant was very optimistic about reason, but then, you want to go? It's okay? Very optimistic about reason. By the way, when in the 18th century he talked about the critique of pure reason, what did he mean by pure reason? Today, someone like Foucault would say that's nonsense. Nothing is pure. Everything is historically contingent. It's a critique of impure reason. So archaeology, genealogy, all that Foucault stuff, which is so popular in postmodern times, is talking about an exercise in impure reason. That means when reason itself is impure, it has no precise identity. It changes over time. And therefore, there is no question of optimism when there is no identity. For Kant, it was different. That's all I can say, madam.
We can envy Kant, I would say, for his optimism in reason. And just one sentence, if you allow me, why I stress the social and political sublime, because, well, technology is politics. Technology is a project of society. In that sense, I think the first instance is actually society, and politics and technology is derived from that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's very true. Yes.
Thank you, Gordana. We have another comment from another student, Laura. You want to say something?
Yes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I want to ask you, because I think Kant talk about the concept of genius. If you can talk a little bit about the relationship between genius and imagination and reason, how it is.
Well, I, you will have to forgive me because I did not. I know about. I know of it, but I did not really prepare this part.
Okay.
I shall look into it and then uh, I shall send a
That's
brief note on it
okay.
by email. I'm so sorry, I can't really say anything about it.
That's
Thank you very
fine.
much. It's a very pertinent question.
Okay. And then
Any
also
Mm,
you talk about uh, this technological sublime.
mhm.
Um, I think the question is related with Gordana, but what happened with the autonomy of reason? Because, as you say, Kant was very kind of this triumph of reason, but with this technological sublime, how reason, uh, what is the
Ah,
purpose of reason here?
okay. Now, there are people who are positive about this technological sublime. I mentioned transhumanism as an ideology.
Yeah.
And by the way, transhumanism has become an international group, an international organization, and a party. In fact, you can become a member of this transhumanist club or whatever by paying 5,000 something. Okay. Anyway, so, and the members are not just ordinary members. Some of the most eminent technologists, like director of Google and all those big professors, mathematicians, physicists, and mostly technocrats, they are connoisseurs of it. And they have a vision of the future that the way we human beings are, biologically constituted human beings, it's a fragile condition. We're so vulnerable to disease and everything, and you die, and that is, and so now they think that technology has come to a state at which there could be intervention into this organic constitution to enhance the human capacity through no so this enhanced human beings would evolve. They could evolve. Now they can evolve. So earlier it was evolution by natural selection, okay, Darwinian evolution by natural selection. And how many years it took? Millions of years for us to arrive at this condition. Now with this NBIC, the possibility of intervention at least shows the prospect of changing the evolutionary trend and expediting it in such a way that maybe within 500 years you could produce a very enhanced human being. Just call it human being because it could be half human, half mechanical something, okay, half engineered. So if technology can replace, if not fully and substantially replace natural evolution, then it would be a matter of evolution by artificial selection as opposed to natural selection. All right. So there are those optimists who believe in the power of reason giving us this technological sublime. Others are dystopian. They are utopian, others are dystopian, who would say that you are really committing a crime of bringing an end to humanity. Because if this trend goes on, the transhumanist trend goes on, maybe in 1,000 years, hardly any human being will be left in this human condition. All right. So that's what I meant by reason itself losing a precise identity. In which direction reason will drive history becomes uncertain. You have the transhumanist on the one hand, you have the anti-transhumanists on the other hand. And that's what I mean. Someone like Foucault probably is quite right about the deflationary analysis of rationality, human reason.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Yes, Binamr, do you want to ask something?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Actually, sir, I had a question, sir. What is the basic difference between mathematical and technological sublime?
Okay. Mathematical sublime refers to infinity. I gave again and again the example of the starry sky. How large does it look when you look at it? You would say very large. How very large? At one point, you will say it's infinitely large. That means your imagination cannot, your senses and your imagination cannot represent it. They become inadequate to a full grasp. Okay, so that's mathematical infinity. Dynamically sublime means the very word dynamics refers to the ability to move, so power, a force. Okay, so nature has overwhelming forces, and I gave the example of, let's say, an earthquake or huge ocean storm like that. Okay, that is also difficult for a mere sense or imagination fully to represent. So that's the difference between the mathematically sublime and the dynamically sublime. The dynamically sublime may not be quite infinite, because if you are talking about the ocean, it is still finite. So the mathematically sublime is really sublime in the par excellence. Yes.
So, but sir, is this dynamic sublime same as? But because I have asked about the technological, the difference between the mathematical and the technological aspect, like the sublime.
I see. Okay, now technologically sublime is not about nature. It's about technology. So now it depends. Now it's a question of the power of technology. I mean, has it got infinite power? I mean, can technology extend to to something that is of infinite dimension? Can do something that is of infinite dimension. Now, computation, of course, is mathematical by nature, and it can handle. I don't know. I am not grounded in mathematics, but I guess it can handle this recombinatory. In its recombinatory process, it can handle enormous amount of data. So its database could become, if not infinitely large, it's near infinitely, large. So that creates a sense of the technological sublime. I mean, computer science is a very good example. And by the way, since all of you are from literature, there is one remark, if we have the time, just to say a comparison of this kind of technological sublime. And in literature, you have that Argentine a story writer, great literary person, George Louis Borges. Okay, he has this famous story called the what is that? The Tower of Babel, not the Library of
Of
Babel.
Babylon.
Yeah, the Library of Babel. Okay. I just looked at it. That where is that piece of paper where I had written down something very interesting which relates to this technological sublime. Where is it? Just, I'll get it 1 minute. Yes. So the Library of Babel, there were, how many books were there according to the story? Books of 410 pages in that library, each having 40 lines of 80 characters. Now, what would be the quantity? It contains no less than 25 to the power 1321000 books. Okay. Now, that is the kind of infinity that literary thinking is conceiving. Borges is a master in that. Okay. So in another place, Borges is saying, talking about possibilities becoming infinite. For instance, if I have to go home, let's say the possibility of taking either this route or that route. Now, if I take one route, one of the two routes, that very route may have another set of possibilities, maybe 3 possibilities. Okay? And each of those 3 will have still another set of 3 possibilities, and infinitely. So literary thinking can also be an exercise in infinity. And that creates a literary sublime. Okay? So the scope for the sublime is there for human thinking also, not just technological sublime or natural sublime. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Shivadi?
I have one question if I'm allowed, like if time is
Please
there.
go ahead. Please go
Yes.
So,
ahead.
sir, so after listening to all the questions, even I was, how to say, yeah, it stimulated my mind as well, and I think, I mean, whatever my like, whatever my understanding leads me to thinking that there must be some kind of sublimity of discourse. If I could, which could influence this moral autonomy. If I could give an example. Um, that in 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna shows his Virat Roop, after showing everything and after Arjun is overwhelmed, Krishna says that Maya ete nihata purvameva nimitta matram bhave savyasachin, that I have already done everything, you just become an instrument. So now this phenomena, if it is true, and Arjuna does so, whatever Krishna, like in a which way Krishna asks him to do, now we can see this kind of phenomena in every discourse, whether it's social, political, technological. So is there really a kind of moral autonomy when the discourse itself becomes sublime?
I am, again, the question is not clear to me, because the discourse becoming sublime is one thing, and moral autonomy is quite another thing. How they are entangled in this case, I'm not sure. In the case of Krishna Bhagavad Gita example, nimitta matram, of course, that's about human agency is not really agency proper, because the only agent is Krishna. Okay.
Yep.
And so all these so-called human agents are mere conduits connected to the ultimate agency of Krishna. Okay. Now, does that make that discourse sublime? That Bhagavad Gita discourse sublime? Or
Ye-
is if,
so the grand vision of this Krishna as everything. So
uh,
what I'm saying is, this political discourse, let's say any political discourse, for example, it could become this cosmic reality, that this is where the truth lies, and which often is what so this has been repeated several times in history, where a
mm,
person loses his or her moral autonomy to this idea of cosmic kind of nature of some truth which is politically related.
uh-huh.
um, so in that sense,
Okay,
this
okay, okay. Now, for Kant, the moral autonomy is the autonomy of the individual moral agent. So if the individual moral agency goes, morality goes. Okay.
okay.
So and so if morality has any kind of sublimity, it will simply disappear with the disappearance of the individual moral agent. Uh, Now, of course, you can have a very different moral system in which you become truly moral by losing your individual agency, the way Bhagavad Gita is talking about. Okay? You do not become truly moral so long as you retain your individual agency. You become truly moral only when you sort of uh, submit yourself to the agency of Krishna. All right. So, and then it becomes a matter of some kind of cosmic agency being the principle of a moral order, cosmic moral order. Yes, that will create some kind of a mystical experience, isn't it? Because you are unifying with reality at the cosmic level, agency at the cosmic level. And so, yes, then you can create something sublime. Yes, that's true.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Because this idea of transhuman
Mm.
is very similar to a kind of technology being a cosmic um, potential, having a cosmic potential. I don't know if I'm correct or not, but
Not quite, not quite.
okay, okay,
Okay, yeah,
okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
welcome.
Thank you, sir. I would like to request our Dean, sir, to say something as a concluding remark.
Well, what a sublime experience to hear you, Sachin. That with that, I can say that, of course, you have taken us to the journey from Longinus to Kant via several thinkers in between. And the very locution that enlightened us is the project of enlightenment that we have. And I'm reminded of a very important thinker from French tradition, that Voltaire. Both Rousseau and Voltaire indirectly talk about sublime. And Voltaire has a very interesting statement on sublime, that si l'on n'est pas sublime, no, si l'on n'est pas sensible, on n'est pas sublime. Without sensibility, if we are not sensible, literally, if I translate, if one is not sensible, one cannot be sublime. So, by meaning that without sensibility, we cannot achieve sublime. So, this is in the background of the entire 17th century thinking. And you have brought it to us, like Edmund Burke also you evoked. And gradually towards German thinking, French thinking, and of course the Irish and the overall English thinking, we find this as the background for a lot of thinking which has gone in last 3-4 centuries. So we are grateful, sir, for your kind exposition of this subject, taking us to a journey of such an important of evolution of such an important idea across, I mean, something that takes us to 21st century as well. And when I quote Voltaire, that is where the foundation, Kant is the theoretical foundation, and Voltaire and Rousseau, they become the somewhere the social and the political foundation for the modern worlds. So a lot of questions that were asked often correlate to the thinking of uh, these two thinkers and some of their creations also. For example, when somebody talked about the creation of the myth or creation of the ideas or literary creation, when you yourself talked about, and you talked about Borges in that context, definitely we have another a very important text, that is Julie and the Nouvelle or the New Eloise. That's a very important text that takes us to this journey. Again, in a very, very practical way, where you find different kinds of sublimity that you have evoked today and you have discussed before us. So we are grateful, sir, for this sublime experience that you have given us. And someday, hopefully, this sublimity will include the senses also, and you will be present here, directly present to our senses, given to our senses. And if, today we could feel the technological sublime, that you are present, you are somewhere else, but you are with us. And someday we will go back in history in terms of ideas, and you will be present with us, hopefully. So we will be grateful for that day, and we would wait for that day. So thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah. Namaskar. Namaskar. Okay, Smita. Bye.
খুব ভালো ছিল স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।
Thank you.
We
Thank you, sir.
have come to the end of the lecture, and I think I should log out.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.